Okay, sounds good. Okay, so welcome here to the what is rapidly transforming this group here from just a business podcast mastermind that was started by a few talented friends a couple years ago, really, who wanted to grow opportunities in the podcasting space, really to exploring what is really bubbling up underneath the surface and what we like to call the at the moment here, we'll call it the audio metaverse space and what's going on there. And I'll give a quick intro, to myself and Henry, who's here today, co-hosting, and then we'll talk to our guest today, Tom Schwab. So Henry is the host of the How of Business podcast, and he's also does some consulting for people who want to start their own businesses. And he's establishing himself as the How of Business podcast. He's been at it for several years, and we can see he's continuing to grow into a recognizable name in the space with some interesting things to share. And my name's Ethan Janney, and I most prominently have the Edge of NFT podcast, which started just over a year ago and is growing so rapidly. We were able to host the 3,500 person NFT LA event at the end of March, just about a month ago. Had key speakers like Mark Cuban, you may have heard of him, even included like musicians like Steve Aoki and other prominent communicators like Tom Bilyeu, entrepreneurs and things like that. So very fun. That's what I've been working on as of late and just growing pretty quickly. And today we have Tom Schwab of Interview Valet. And we were encouraged to invite him by our fellow member here, Mark Hayward, and he has a service called Interview Valet. They help leading brands, coaches, consultants, nonfiction authors build their brand and business with targeted podcast interviews. And he says, if you ask how, you could read his book. If you ask who, you can work with his firm. So Tom, why don't you just pick it up here, give any more intro to you and what you do that might be essential for people to know, and then we'll get into some questions.
Yeah, well, I'm in Kalamazoo, Michigan, so that proves that you can do this from anywhere. My education is as an engineer. My first job out of college was running nuclear power plants. So you'll see, I look at things as process and building it. Spent time in corporate world, spent time in inbound marketing, and really what we're doing now is really using content, right? 20 years ago, it was blogs. Now content means so many different things. And what we do is really help people grow their business. It's like guest blogging, but on podcasts, leveraging other people's audience, getting that know, like, and trust. And I really believe that obscurity is all our biggest problem, right? There's lots of people you could help. Problem is they don't know you exist.
Yeah, obscurity is our biggest problem, except for those people who are, what do they call it? Cancel culture. And you kind of wish nobody knew who you were. But yeah, that's a really good point. And I have found that is a big, something I feel like I probably need to work on. I was going to call it a weakness, but I don't know that that's fair. And that is like when I have something that's powerful and useful for others, sharing it, that can be really half the battle, or maybe 75 to 90% of the battle. Because if you have something that's useful and nobody knows about it, or they don't know how cool it is or great it is, they're just not discovering it, it could just be a pretty depressing way forward at that point. So appreciate what were you doing there. Yeah, go ahead.
And you talk about cancel culture, but often the biggest problem we have is we're our own filter, right? We underestimate what we know and overestimate what other people know. Like one of my favorite phrases is what's ordinary to you is amazing to others. Not to everybody, right? There are certain people that you would say something to them, they would turn you up, and other people would turn you off. That's fine, right? You're not trying to reach the entire world. You're just trying to reach your ideal customers there.
Good point. Yeah, I actually do a bit of coaching when I have the time, for some good friends and businesses that I really believe in. So I have a friend that's growing his business. He's a really great, talented artist and creator. They do like websites and both the back end and the design side of it, and they're doing great. But that whole outreach to clients thing is something they're still wrapping their heads around. And what's interesting is we were talking about email outreach, right? And they're at that stage where they're like, wow, we don't want to send too many emails. We don't want to offend anybody, da, 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 da. And the one guy's saying, I'm on the receiving end of this. I get emails and I get annoyed and I don't want people, emailing back to me all the time. I said, well, think about it this way though. The people who want to hear from you, exactly like you said, they want to hear from you. And then the people that don't, right? And so if you don't if you don't inform people about what you're about, they'll quickly and easily forget about you, and they don't know already, right? You have to teach them. Like one email has to give this little piece of information, and maybe the next email gives a little bit more information about who you are, and the next one gives a little bit more, as opposed to trying to squeeze it all into one and overwhelm them. And it's all about that know, like, and trust thing. And it certainly doesn't happen in a day. That's why it can happen in one email, right? It can happen in like several. So those are really good points. Tell me about just how interview, because we're entrepreneurs here for the most part too. Tell me about how Interview Valet got started and like sort of the business of that and the growth of that and why that's working.
I wish I could say I've got this great business plan, right? The best fiction I've ever written or read is a business plan, right? They all are beautiful and all the graphs go up and to the right. So go back a number of years here. Just before the Great Recession, right? I had a distributorship. I had one customer and I thought I was an entrepreneur. Well, it worked out really well until that one customer, the manufacturer, said, we want to cut out the middleman and go direct. And I'm like, makes a whole lot of sense until you look in the mirror and you go, I'm that middleman. Now they took care of me, but we had a sideline product. It was direct to patient, durable medical equipment. I know that's really sexy, right? We were doing well with it in the state of Michigan. And 2008, there was no way I was going to expand that brick and mortar. So I had read a book by two smart guys out of MIT, Brian Halligan and Dharmesh Shah, and they went on to form HubSpot. And I remember reaching out to them and saying, has anybody tried this for e-commerce? And they're like, no, but it should work. And I was like, yeah, I think the same. So we built that up from a regional player to a national leader with content, with inbound marketing. And the big hack was guest blogs, right? So now fast forward to 2014, I had sold that company. I was in a mastermind group and some of the other business owners in there said, hey, could you help me with my digital marketing? And I tried to show them the same thing that I did, 10 years before. And blogs weren't working by 2014. And, you ask any business owner to write a blog, that's a homework assignment. So I hypothesized, I bet you could use podcast interviews like we used to use guest blogs, right? To get in front of that audience, to get the know, like, trust, to get the backlinks. So we started to test that. Ethan, it worked so well, it was converting 25 times better than blogs. And at first I thought, it's a niche, it's a personality. We continued to test it. It continued to work. I was teaching it, but people just kept saying, just do it for me, right? Our clients are the best copywriters. I can remember a client saying, let me be the guest, you take care of the rest. I'm like, oh, that's good copy. I'm going to take that as a tagline. So 2015, we started to test it. We come out of beta in 2016. For the first few years, people would go, what's a podcast? But we were building it. We were building the systems, the infrastructure. And, now fast forward, we've got a team of 35 based in Europe and North America, all remote. About half of our team is military spouses. We work with about 200 clients at a time. So, going back to it was evolutionary, not revolutionary. So every time I'd learn something, it's like, what's the next thing? And then the other thing was listening to the experts, right? The expert is not me because I've got an opinion. It's not, a consultant that I hire. The expert is really our customers that are telling us what they love and what they loathe, are the podcasters that tell us what they love and what they loathe, and doubling down on one and stop doing the other.
Cool. I appreciate that in-depth description of the sort of growth of everything and a little bit of background to it. We love entrepreneurs here, so it's a great story. I think so. Here's something that I think you might have an interesting perspective on. We talk, I think, quite a bit about sort of the nuances of being a podcaster and who your audience is and kind of what your reach is and what that means. And so I find that one of the biggest misconceptions of the newbies getting into podcast is the goal of my podcast is to have a huge audience and then make my money from advertising, right? And what we find is very interesting, like talk about the healthcare industry. We had one episode here or two where we talked about a very specific case of a podcast that had nearly zero audience in the healthcare industry, but was very integral to a business. And it was about the podcast host meeting with the guests who were potential clients, doing a little bit of promo to fill out the professionalism of the thing, but just building those relationships so that when those clients needed the services that they offered, they knew who to go come talk to, and they knew who they had the relationship with. So that having been said, actually, let me give you one more example of like the nuances of audiences. One that's close to our hearts here is Henry's history. He had the How of Car Wash podcast before he had the How of Business podcast. And again, it was interesting. It's interesting to hear from him the type of advertising that you can get when you have a niche market like that. There's people who they just want to talk to those car wash owners, right? And they don't have to have a huge audience of millions of people for it to be actually a high value ad for them. So what I want to get from you is when you think about like placing people on a podcast, how much do you think about the audience size versus the audience niche? Do you look at that stuff? What kind of parameters do you take into account? And what should people think about when they're going on those podcasts in terms of getting that conversion, 25% more, like you were mentioning?
Yeah. And you were so spot on there, right? Bigger is not better. Better is better. Right. And I can think of one of my first early podcast interviews. I was so thrilled because, I think they got like 40,000 downloads. It was not my audience, but I was thrilled to be there. Out of that, I probably got 5 leads. Shortly thereafter, I was on another podcast and the host said, yeah, I get about 300 downloads per episode. Well, I got over 50 sales off of that, right? There's more fish in the ocean, but if you can find a barrel of fish, go there every time. And so that's what we remind, our clients. And I think this digital age, we all get enticed by the numbers, right? Oh, it's bigger. There's a bigger reach. But really what we teach them is to really look at 4 things. Really, the first one is the podcast, right? Does the podcast have your ideal listener? And one of the great things to look at is often the listener is like the host or aspires to be like the host, right? We had a client that came to us and said, I want to talk to Fortune 100 CEOs. And I'm like, yeah, we can target those. And then he said, I'd like to go on this podcast. And I knew the podcast. And I said, do you think any Fortune 100 CEO is going to listen to a podcast that starts out with, yo, yo, yo? And he's like, no. And I'm like, yeah, nice podcast, but not for you. So first, look at the podcast. Do they have the right audience? The second thing to look at is the website, right? Discoverability is still such a problem in podcasts that if they don't have the show notes, if they don't have the backlink, you may not get as much value from that. We've got certain clients that do it for the SEO value. So the podcast, the website, the next thing to look at is the reach. And the reach isn't just how many downloads they get, but are they promoting it on social media? Is it the right social media? Are they promoting it to their email list? Sign up for their email list, see what they promote there. The fourth thing, and this has gotten more important over the last couple of years, is brand affinity, right? We're judged by the company we keep. So if you were seen on that podcast, would that help a sale or hurt a sale, right? Would you be proud of that? And now more than ever, when you Google somebody's name, often you'll find their last podcast or their last video, right? So if you go on, I call them Wayne's World podcasts. Remember Wayne's World, two guys in their mom's basement? Well, if you're trying to close a 6-figure deal, right? And all of a sudden they see you on, this Wayne's World podcast, Stoner Brothers podcast. If somebody's listening to that and they're like, oh, this is not the guy I thought it was, right? So make sure it's consistent with your brand. And
Stoner Brothers podcast is my favorite podcast.
It could be. And they probably have got some great sponsors, from different things. But just make sure it's consistent with your brand.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I'm just because I have too creative of a mind. It's funny when you talked about the Fortune 100 CEOs and everything. Let's do a podcast that starts with yo, yo, yo. I'm just today, I was listening to the Ben Horowitz book called The Hard Thing About Hard Things. Mm-hmm. He's one of the lead VCs of Andreessen Horowitz, of course. And the book is riddled with quotes from hip hop. He's like this huge hip hop fan. It's like really like counterintuitive how into hip hop he is. So anyways, I get what you're saying, but I thought of that immediately. It's really funny. But those are really good points. And they're also really good points for the people like us who are the podcasters, right? Like you said, how's our website? Is it discoverable? Like, are people finding it? What are our other methods of providing reach? Do we have a newsletter? Are we promoting on social? Are they the right social channels? And the brand affinity thing is also something to consider too. Am I creating a product or experience such that the person, they're at least going to want to be affiliated with it, right? Or again, with all of those things, how can I highlight those things in the way that I market to people coming on the show and potential sponsors? I know for us, for example, for the Edge of NFT podcast, we are have become a central figure in the NFT space. And so in addition, right, to coming on the podcast, to be on the podcast, they become part of our network. We can make introductions, we can help people launch projects, make the right connections and things like that. So that's interesting stuff. And I'll have one more follow-up point with the difference between reach, and it also overlaps interesting with the brand affinity thing. So I think I mentioned this before in here. One of my businesses got written up in the Wall Street Journal several years ago. It's a business that's in New York. It's a piano tuning business. This woman just, kind of randomly who writes articles, she thought it was such a cool idea. She tried it out and wrote an article about it. And it was so exciting. The customers that I got from that there wasn't a lot. And they were some of the worst customers. I have this one woman who she literally had worked with, everyone from like Bill Clinton to, all these famous people. She had all these pictures of famous people on her wall, so we're working with them. But she was the cheapest, most just orneriest person you'd ever have to work with. She never wanted to pay full price. She always had a complaint. She was one of those people who always came up with a complaint just so she could try to get a refund on something. And it was just like, I don't want to deal with this. But the brand affinity of being written up in the Wall Street Journal is useful, right? So it's like, use it for what it's worth. Even though I didn't necessarily get a lot of clients from that and didn't necessarily like the clients that I got from that, to be able to just say, hey, I've been in the Wall Street Journal, that's really valuable. And so, hey,
And
that's fine. That's what it's useful for.
that you were able to learn from that too, right?
Oh,
That
for
was an
sure.
experiment, that test. If you said, do you want to advertise in the Wall Street Journal? No. Right. Definitely that's not your audience. And we worked with other clients on that too, where I can think of one gentleman where, he just wanted to have a different customer in every industry in every state. He was a fractional CFO, and he got on a dental podcast, and we were able to attribute the traffic, and they're like, man, you nailed that one. And he's like, oh, I love dentists, right? They're professionals, recession proof, good cash flow. The next 6 months, all he did was dental podcasts, right? 80% of his business now is dentists. So being able to test those different fishing holes, if you will, right? The Wall Street Journal, that's not a fishing hole that you want. But for him, he was able to test that, dental podcast and go, oh yeah, I'm going to keep going back there.
Cool. So I mentioned a little bit previously. I'm actually not familiar with how much time you spend in these different platforms. Would just love to get your take on it. Twitter Spaces, Clubhouse. Like, how has this become? It's become a part of all of our worlds, whether we like it or not, for the past year and a half or so. What are your thoughts? Are you integrating with that? What have you seen?
We tried Clubhouse for a while, and we found that our ideal clients were not on there. And part of the reason that I had an issue with that is, even as a consumer, is that, like podcasts, 70% of the people that listen to podcasts listen to them sped up, and my mind would just wander. Right now, LinkedIn is really, really big for us. Video or audio is big for us. So even sending an email or a text, if we can send a little audio clip or a video clip, the engagement is so much higher there. And, like I said, I are engineer. So if I do a post or if I do an email, the chances of there being a typo in there is probably pretty high. In fact, my team knows that if there's not a typo in there, it's probably a phishing email. Don't respond to it. But very easily to send somebody a little audio or a little video, it's so much richer. It stands out a lot more. And to me, I don't necessarily want more and more communication. I want to be understood better, and I want richer communication. So anything I can do there, it is a whole lot better.
Ooh, that's very interesting. And so I gather what you're saying is, like, if I get a bunch of, I get so many messages on LinkedIn. Let me tell you about it. It's crazy. And especially when we put on a conference, the number of people who think they deserve to speak at your conference, whatever, it's like entitlement is crazy. But so you're saying, if I want to send an outbound message, for example, on LinkedIn, it might be cool. I don't know if this is what you're saying, but it does sound cool either way. It might be cool for me to just record a little audio, pop it up on my Dropbox or something, and say, hey, check this out. I record a little message for you, and maybe even make it personalized, right? Is
Very,
that what you're saying?
very much so. And people go, well, that's not scalable. Maybe it's not scalable, but you know what? It's very, very effective. And, I can only guess how many pitches you get to be on your podcast, right? I get about 4 a day, and I don't even have a podcast, right? They all love the show and want to be a guest. And it's just a list and a robo email there. It's not effective. If anything, it can hurt you. We had one client that I thought it was genius. After we were working with him, I went to his store and bought a product, and I got the thank you note. And, he came back, and there was this quick little video that said, Tom, thank you so much. And all the rest of this. And I'm like, how the heck does he do that for every client? And I was able to reach out to him, and he's like, no, you've got the, top 200 most common names. And they just went through it and did a quick little video. And he recorded all day long the same thing. And all that changed was the first name. But people listen for that, right? We can spot the canned email. And when somebody says our name, or it's a little bit more personalized, that stands out a little bit more, right? It's the same thing with podcasting, right? There's that connection, that interaction that you get from that. And I think if you're not consistent with that, it can hurt the brand, right? So I feel like, oh, I know Ethan, I know Henry, I listen to him every week, right? And then I get some canned email. It might look and say, well, is it really coming from them? Is it just, a VA in a third world country? So if you can personalize it in any little way, I think it stands out a whole lot more.
Yeah, it's a good point. And it's also comes down to processing for people because text is overwhelming. It kind of taxes the brain. If all I have to do is sit there and let the audio visuals wash over me, it's way different than having to go through, sort out what important parts of the email message, whether it's worth reading or not, all these details. I think that's pretty cool. Yeah, we're doing some pitch decks. We did a accelerator program for the business, and at the end of it, that was part of the program, was producing a pitch deck, and they had actually some coaches to help us do that. It was really great, but they had us create like a 5-minute PowerPoint pitch and then a video of my face, saying, talking someone through the pitch, right? And I could see, ideally you're going to pitch it in front of somebody in person, but even just sending someone a deck where you read through it, right? You read through it in the background, they get to hear your voice and they get to know you, and they don't have to like make sense of what you mean by this slide, which just has like a picture and a few words on it. You can deliver that message. Yeah, so I can see where we're kind of doing things like that already, but could even double down on that. Very cool. So let's see here. What about, is there anything else that you're up to besides Interview Valet? Like, being an entrepreneur, do you have are you a successful shiny objector? Do you have some other businesses that you run or invest in or consult on or anything like that? Just curious.
I do, but I'm also like the dog that bites onto something and just doesn't let go.
Mm-hmm.
And so I know myself with that. So intentionally, I don't do things that will distract me. Right. So a lot of buddies that are into real estate, and I just know if I got into that, I'd be all in. So instead, I'll do a syndication deal. Show me the prospectus. I can understand that, and I'll do it. But I don't do things halfway. Right? We live on 6.5 acres. We've got 2 miniature donkeys, and I say that's the only thing half-assed around here. Right? So I'm all in on things. So really, to me, it's always keeping it new, keeping it fresh. Because as an entrepreneur, I get if I say bored, my wife early on said, the first 2 years I beat my head against the wall to make something work. Then the next 2 years it works and it's profitable. Then the next 2 years it's very profitable and I'm bored and on to the next thing. So with that, I try to always think, where am I in this? And always trying to reach out into that new thing. And even with the business, how do I scale it? What's the next chapter in that, or where are we moving into? We've gone into different areas. We're looking to branch off into different languages now too. So always to keep that challenge in front of me, because I never understood those people that say, I've got 20 years sales experience, right? I was a salesman for a while. I realized that I got my first 2 years experience, and then after that, it was just repeating. So that's one of the things I love about entrepreneurship and podcasting, and the whole, if you want to call it metaverse or digital, whatever it is, there's always new things, right? So you're always learning. If you stop learning, you're going to be left behind really, really quick.
Mm-hmm. So tell me, and I'll hand it over to Henry for some of his questions in a minute here, but this is the last one before that. And that is kind of, you touched upon a little bit, sort of the growth of the business, but I would like maybe another like zoom out perspective. Talk me through kind of the process of growth from, was it just you or just a couple people or whatever, just started Interview of LA, we added XYZ, we added XYZ, we added this, here's where we are today. And then, and sometimes people have this and they don't, but just tell us what you've got. Where do you see Interview of LA 5 years from now, 10 years from now, dare I say? I know that's a difficult question. Yeah.
Well, and it's interesting because when we first started out, I knew I wanted to be totally remote. My previous business, trying to get labor in a small town is tough. And serving a global audience, you can't say, "Hey, we're open 9 to 5 East Coast time unless it snows." That doesn't work. So wanted to go out and be remote. And early on, it was myself and I had 2 other people, right? And so we were doing that, and it was, I call that was sort of the small bus period, right? Um, what is it? Everybody should have a seat on the bus. Well, we were on a small bus. Everybody was doing everything. And as we grew, then we started to get more specialized. And that was nice. We went from probably 3 to 5 people. Well, I can remember when we had about 6 people. There was a podcaster that reached out to me on a Friday night. And she says, "Tom, I love you and your team, but you're killing me." Right. At that point, every one of our clients had one person they were in charge of. Right. So they had one person to go to. But with the podcasters, it was a bunch of different people. So at that point, with about 6 people on the team, we're like, we've got to have half the people just serving the podcasters, half serving the clients. And we'll do all the connection between there. So that was sort of like that big first growth spurt that we had. And that worked really well. It always works well up until it doesn't, right? How do you build the databases so that everybody can talk to each other? And about 18 months ago, we hit where we were about 25 people. And the problem was is that, we had like 2 teams of 12, and they were just getting too big. And so I looked at it and said, well, I was in the military. How would they do this, right? And then it struck me, they'd break it up into platoons or squads or smaller ones. So that's what we did. We broke it down into 3 pods, right? And each pod's got, I don't know, about 8 to 10 people on it. And half of them are podcast relationship managers. The other ones are client account managers. And I promoted people in there to be the leaders of that. And I look at that, and that's my scalable way to grow. And I've told the teams this, that once those pods get up again to, probably the $1.5 to $2 million in sales for that pod, we're going to hit the point where they're too big, and we'll break it into 2 pods. And so we're going to just keep doing that. My limitation to growth now, though, is how fast I can build my leaders, right? Because I can't go out and find somebody that's got 10 years experience in podcast interview marketing. No, we've got to build them internally. So I'm always trying to figure how can we develop the people internally. And, where I hope it is from 10 years from now, I hope that I am truly the owner and the chief evangelist officer. That's what I aspire to be, out there to talk about it, but that I've got this team of various leaders that have grown up in the organization, and that they are growing fast enough for me to take all the opportunities that I see there, and that we are growing fast enough so that there's opportunities so they don't have to go someplace else.
Cool. It stimulated more questions than I might have, but I know Henry might have some. I think he probably does. What you got for us, Henry?
Oh, Tom, I thought I'd get tactical for a second. I got your email, I don't know, maybe a few weeks ago on Apple charts, podcast charts. Interesting insights there. So I just wanted to get your thoughts on that and a couple of questions. I think the thing that, as you covered in that email, that it revealed is that it has very little to do or nothing to do with downloads necessarily, or ratings and reviews, which we all thought for a long time. I know I had always been asking for rating and reviews of my guests, not so much on the show, but of my guests. So just wanted to chat about that and what you learned from that, and understanding what really does go into the Apple podcast charts.
Well, and I'm a geek, right? I'm an engineer. So I loved when they actually shared
right
what the algorithm was, because before that, everybody was guessing, how secret, do you, how do you get to the top there? And so Apple was really transparent with it. Now, granted, it was hidden in their website, but they talked about that their top list there had nothing to do with downloads, had nothing to do with ratings and reviews. Once again, bigger is not better. Better is better. And the other thing is that I think the reason they did away with the rating and reviews is because it was widely known out there that a lot of people were either buying them or that bots were doing them. And it's almost like the days when they used to, paid backlinks and stuff like that, that you'd get punished for those. So really they're looking at things that are, I would say, more momentum, right? So how fast is it growing? How much engagement is it? And the other thing too is Apple is just looking at their platform, right? Not everybody listens on Apple, but they can see how much engagement is there. And that's something to keep in mind, right? If you've got just all ads at the end there, well, you're almost telling people leave right now, right? And that's going to hurt you. Whereas if you want people to stay to the very end, tell them to stay to the end, right? We've got something at the special at the end for it. Or I've seen some podcasters do what I call the romper room close. I don't know if you're old enough to remember romper room, when that lady would hold up the mirror and say, and I see Ethan and I see Henry, and every little kid would sit there waiting. Man, maybe she'll see me. She'll say my name. So a lot of times, podcasters, if you want to recognize somebody for leaving you a rating and review, right? Don't necessarily ask them, but recognize people that do that. And at the very end there, say, hey, and I'd like to thank Ethan for leaving that rating and review. That was so kind of you. And people will start to listen to that, and they'll start doing those things, and they'll wait till the end to hear maybe their name gets mentioned. So there's a lot of things that you can do to get more engagement there. And I don't say it's necessarily to mess with the charts or anything like that, but what Apple's looking for, what people are looking for. So make sure that there's value throughout the entire show.
Yeah, so let's just follow up on that, because engagement, and as I was reading through that, as Apple defines it, is an engaged listener, as they measure it, is someone who's listened to at least 20 minutes of the episode or 40% of the episode. And so I was looking at some of my stats, and this is something we've talked about before, Ethan, on this Mastermind, is my shows run anywhere from 45 to 55 minutes, something in that range. But I'm looking at my stats right now on Apple Podcast, and, the best is 55% consumption. But so I've struggled with that. And I've ended up on the side of, I'm going to do my show, but I can't ignore that data point, because that is how, certainly, as we've talked about, Apple is rating me. What are your thoughts? In other words, my question is, do I shorten? Should I be at 30 minutes because that's the sweet spot, or do I do what I do?
Well, I would say your allegiance is to those people that have gotten to you where they are. And your podcast is great, right? You've got lots and lots of loyal listeners, right? And they've already told you by their actions that they like that format. Right. Now, maybe you could change that up and do some short, some longer there, but I don't know that I would change it just to make Apple happy, because, and especially if people are used to that. Most of the time we'll work with our clients and say, typically somewhere between 30 to 45 minutes for an interview. And that's just for the interview part, because what we have found is that most people aren't tight enough to get a good interview in 15 or 20 minutes, right? You're just starting to get into it. And then the flip side is, if they don't love you after an hour, giving them 2 more hours is not going to change their mind. So I think there's that 30 to 45 minutes, even to an hour, because you also look at the data that says 70% of the people listen to it sped up. So just because the runtime is an hour, they could be listening to it for 30, 40 minutes there.
Fair enough. All right. We'll bring it back up to a higher level. What these 2 questions have in mind, but I'll ask you this one first. What do you think is key to getting the most out of a podcast appearance? So looking at it from your perspective, where you're helping your clients get on a show, what do you advise them as to how to get the most out of that show? We've touched on some of those things already, but what are some of those other things?
I think the overarching is start with the end in mind. Remember why you're there, what you're trying to accomplish. And so make sure that the stories, that they support those. Flip side too is that podcasts are an awful place to do infomercials, right? And if you start selling too hard, the recording's going to get lost, right? It won't even get aired. Right. So we always teach our clients that show up as a guest, right? What does it mean to be a guest? You show up on time. You sound great. You come with a gift, special things to share with people. Do that. The other thing too is focus on bringing value, right? Your goal should be to make the host look like a genius for bringing you on there. Because if you do that, they'll promote you more than you could promote yourself, right? Because if you promote yourself, boy, it sounds really vain. But if you're bringing that value and the host is saying, oh, this is great, where can people find out about you? All the rest of that, they're just teeing it up for you. And it's that dichotomy of, if you show up ready to give, you'll get a lot out of it too.
Yeah.
The other thing too is the podcast interview is not just that 30 or 45 minutes, right? Spend time beforehand getting to know who the host is, what they talk about, so you're prepared there, right? If you invited me to a physical stage, I'm not going to just wing it, right? But so many people are like, well, it's just Zoom. I do Zoom calls all the time. And then the flip side too, when we stop, the host does a lot of work, the editing it, the promoting it. If you want to say thank you, promote it yourself, repurpose it, all the rest of that. And I think the people that are just, I want to do more and more and more interviews. Why don't you get more and more and more out of the interviews?
Speaking to that, the call to action is always such a challenge because people are listening at the gym while they're walking, while they're running in their car. Any thoughts on what would you see as most effective as a call to action?
Yes. And it's not just my opinion. We've done a lot of research and data around this. Now, every digital marketer will tell you one call to action. I do not disagree with them, but we have tested it. 3 calls to action always work best off of a podcast.
Now, when you say 3 calls to action, mentioning it 3 times for the same thing or 3 different things?
3 different things. Meet people where they are. So give them a small yes, a medium yes, and a heck yes.
So it could be a download, a free call, a copy of the ebook or something like that.
Exactly. Make the first one really easy. Something that's not going to take them a lot of time or a lot of money. Come back to the website to see a chart, a graph. Personal assessments work really well. Doesn't take them a lot of time. The medium yes is something that's going to build the relationship a little bit more. It could be a face-to-camera video. It could be a book, an ebook, a course, right? They're not ready to buy yet, but they're going to invest more time or money with you, right? And then the heck yes, right? If somebody listens to you and they're like, oh, Henry's amazing, right? He works with people like me. I like him. This is the answer to my prayer. Don't slow them down in a funnel, right? If they come with credit card in hand and they want to engage the wizard, right? Let them talk to the wizard. So at the end of the podcast, and sometimes you can even do it throughout the entire thing. It's like, so Tom, how can people get in touch with you? Well, you can just come back. We've got this assessment that you can do. They mentioned my book. You can get a free copy, right? Just come back here. And if any of this resonated with you, just come back to this same page here and I'll put my calendar scheduling link and we can talk. So it's one where it's meeting them where they are. And it doesn't sound like a really hard call to action, but hey, how can I help you? A small yes, a medium yes, or a heck yes.
Yeah. Where I've been observing that is my call to action for me, if I'm a guest or if I'm, sharing, I'm doing a topic episode where I don't have a guest, has mostly been schedule a free conference call, coaching consultation with me. But what I've come to realize and understand is that's intimidating for a lot of people, not because it's me, just talking to someone seems for a lot of people like I'm not quite ready to do that yet. So when I offer a download of some sort, that's been hugely popular. So it's also about this, I think touches on Tom, nurturing those people. They're not quite ready to talk to me yet, but they'll take a download to further warm them up to who I am and to trusting me. Yeah.
And different people make decisions differently, right? Some people will do it really quickly. Other ones need time. The other thing is that sometimes the person you're talking to is not the decision maker. Maybe there's something that's a download that's got the information on it that they can download and give it to the decision maker. And it's already got your branding on there, and it makes it you more referable at that point.
Yeah. Great. Thanks for sharing those thoughts. Those are the primary questions I had, Ethan.
Cool. Yeah, I've got a few more. And I'll go back to some of the points you made earlier. Well, actually, this is some good things to share here in the last 10 minutes or so, actually. So us as podcasters, tell us how we fit into your system. You know, if we want to get involved with what you provide, you know, what does that look like, and how can we best make use of it?
Sure. And there's two ways we can help, right? We've got a double-sided marketplace, right? We need hosts and we need guests. Now, people say, well, why don't you charge both? Well, because it would set up a conflict of interest. The other thing too is that the host is already paying us, if you will, by giving us access to their audience, right? So if you're a host and you're looking for great guests, you can reach out to Interview Valet. We don't pitch, we introduce, right? And you'll be assigned a podcast relationship manager, one person that will listen to your show, talk with you, get to know you. And if we get a no, that's fine, right? But we want to know, why wasn't this a good fit? You know, we've got some of our senior podcast relationship managers that know the shows so well, they can filter it. And at the end of the day, nobody wants more pitches. They want more great introductions. So if you're a podcast host, we can help you that way. Or if you want to get on podcasts, right, you can reach out, and we get a lot of podcast hosts that want to be guests on other people's podcasts, right? Best place to find a podcast listener is listening to a podcast. So going out on other people's show is a great way for them to sort of try before they buy, right? They can hear you there, and it's like, wow, I liked your, I liked the energy. I liked what you talked about. That seemed like interesting, right? So that they would come back to the show that way.
And would you say you have like an ideal client? I mean, of course, you're going to serve lots of people. You might just say a podcast or somebody that wants to go on podcast, but you know, you might be more useful to executives that own a large business, or you know, people who have a comedy podcast or whatever. Yeah, what's your ideal? Where do you seem to fit best?
Yeah, we've got a very, very tight ideal, right? Because you know, our overall mission is to personally introduce inspiring thought leaders to millions of people they could serve for the betterment of all. Now, you got to narrow that down. We focus on 3 verticals, not necessarily where our clients are, but where our clients' clients are. So that's business, health, nutrition, and wellness, and faith and spirituality, right? Business by far is our biggest one there. Our ideal clients are the ones that are using this for business growth, business development. You know, it's not just an ego thing. They want to get results out of it. They also have a higher lifetime value, right? So the higher the lifetime value, the more you need a relationship to sell that, right? If you're just trying to sell, you know, a 99-cent widget, nobody needs to know who you are, the backstory on that. So the higher the relationship sale, the better podcast interviews work. And then also someone that can serve a global or at least a national audience. So if somebody came to us and they had a great business, but it was only, you had to drive to them here in Kalamazoo, Michigan. Well, they might talk to 10,000 people, but you know, they'd be lucky if a handful were within driving distance. So we look at that too. And, you know, at the end of the day, we just do discovery calls with people. You know, we're not trying to sell anybody anything. We'll talk with you about your business, how you could leverage podcast interviews, what we've learned over the last 8 years, and be honest with you and say, hey, we think this would work for you, or we're not the best agency. You might want to try this person, or, you know, we'd love to work with you, but before we do, here's some things you might want to tune up so that you get the best results out of that.
Great info. So we got about 5 minutes left. Right before we end, we want to make sure we get details where you want to send people, but I think we have time for at least one more. And it's sort of on topic because you've mentioned it, but a little bit off topic of podcasting. You talked about building leaders, and that kind of piqued my interest. And again, because we're entrepreneurial here, I think that might be interesting for Henry and I and others to hear about. Like any insights you can share in that, trying to build leaders within your organization and how you see that and what works and what doesn't.
It's probably the hardest thing that I have to do, because as entrepreneurs, as type A, often we're like, oh, I know the answer, I can do this, or it's just easier for me to do it than show you how to do it. And I've had a coach, Todd Palmer, that helped me with this for years. And I can remember we did a live meeting one time, and he said, you're the boss, you get to talk last. And every time something came up, I would jump in first. And he pulled me out aside and he's like, if you keep talking first, I'm going to start kicking you in the shins during the meeting. And that reminded me is that people are waiting for me to say something so they can follow it, right? But they're not learning from that. So often, to me, developing the leaders is when they bring a question to me, not to give them the answer, but to ask, well, what do you think we should do? Give me 3 things that you think we should do. And if I don't like what they say, maybe I'll ask some follow-up questions. If not, I'll say, you understand the problem. You're closer to it. How can I help you? Right. And I've done that level, right? I want them to understand it. I want them to grow. And the other thing that I see is that the way we treat, our next level of managers is the way they treat their next level of managers too. So there's that effect that goes there. And I'm trying to grow my company and grow my leaders. It's once again a double-sided marketplace, because there's a lot of opportunities there. But if I don't have somebody to run that opportunity, I don't have time to do that, right? So I want to build somebody up there too. And I think today, especially younger workers, they want advancement. They want new challenges, right? And if you can't give them to them in your business, they'll probably go someplace else. So I want to make sure that they're feeling developed there too. And I think it's, I don't know, I find it easier being remote to have those conversations with them. I know a lot of people struggle with that. I've just gotten really comfortable with it. And I prefer running a remote team as opposed to driving into an office.
Great insights. Appreciate it. Henry, any last minute thoughts before we wrap it up?
No, thanks, Tom. Thanks for the information. Thanks for being with us. I've had your your clients on my show in the past, and I'm sure will again. So thanks for everything you do.
Well, appreciate what you guys do. And I always say that anybody that says doing a podcast is easy has either never done it or never done it well, right? It's like playing football on a Sunday afternoon. People don't appreciate the work that goes into it. So thank you for what you do. I know it's not always fun. It's not always energizing. And that's why most podcasts that die within the first 10 episodes. You guys have been doing it so long, and I thank you for all of that, and for what you do for our guests too.
Awesome. Appreciate it. So then before we head out here, just make sure and reiterate where people can go to find out more. Where would you like to direct them? Maybe give them something simple they can do, something a little bit intermediate, and something like a little bit more investment. I don't know.
I was going to say, since this is live, give me about an hour and I'll put up this page. It's called a welcome page. And if nothing else, just go there to see the best practice for a welcome page. It'll be interviewvalet with a v.com/BPM, Business Podcast Mastermind. When you go there, you're going to see pictures of Ethan and Henry, right? They're your friends, right? That's the trust seal at the top. Then you'll see some boilerplate text, and then you'll see my picture and all my social media, so you can find it there. And then you'll see 3 offers, right? That small yes, the medium yes, and the heck yes. So the small yes, it's an assessment, right? 10 questions. Will podcast interview marketing work for me? The medium yes, free copy of my book, Podcast Guest Profits. Takes you a little bit more time to read that. And if it's the heck yes, if you're like, wow, this makes a whole lot of sense, I'd like to see how I could use this in my business or how I could get guests for my podcast, I'll put all my calendar scheduling link there. So all of that is at interviewvalet.com/BPM.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Tom. Appreciate it. You put a lot of energy and thought into your presence, and we appreciate that and hope to see you in the future.
Thank you so much.
Catch you later.